How long do you want me to talk? It doesn't matter, I'll end up talking on an hour. Sure. Awesome, we're gonna get started. If you can put away your phones, and the sign-in sheet I believe is going around, so yeah, just sign your name. Cool, so today we have Minnie Ingersoll. Minnie worked at Google for 11 years. She was a product manager and co-founded the Access team, which is now Google Fiber. And after working at Google for 11 years, she left and started her own company. She's the CEO of Shift, and Shift essentially makes it easier to buy and sell cars. We're super excited to have Minnie today, so we can welcome her to class.
Thanks. So fun to be here. Let's see, what was I? Oh yeah, I'm not actually the CEO. I'm a founder, but I'm the COO.
Okay.
But you know, in the world of running our company, it ends up making a big difference because we have very different roles, and I would never be a CEO because that's just not, it's like dealing with the board and dealing with investors, and I actually like running the company. And I was told the topic was sort of like failures, and I don't know, it was like failures, pain, and regret or something. Great. But I'll kind of run through some of the basics I have, and then pretty informal because that's how I am. So I went to Stanford undergrad. This is the duck phenomenon we always talk about. It's at least at Stanford, it's this notion that everyone's out playing frisbee all the time. But I was a computer science major, and I actually spent all of my time in the study hall just trying to like keep up with class because it was really hard. But the duck phenomenon is kind of that, like on the top it's all glassy, but underneath you're like paddling really hard. Which I think is kind of a common thing right now, which is like, we call it like the Facebook phenomenon, where you everyone compares your insides to everyone else's outsides. And I think that's really easy to do when like everyone, you know, posts on Facebook all their perfect families, but actually like, I don't know, we all scream at each other all the time, and you don't really see that on kind of the outside. So, so yeah, I was Stanford computer science. Few of my good friends, these were my classmates, are now, I had this slide up from a previous talk, and so Steph's one of my good friends. She was the CTO for Hillary Clinton's campaign, and so it was kind of a fun slide. It kind of worked for your class as well, because Hillary just, you know, lost in this big dramatic way, and Steph was kind of a big failure there. My friend Adam just got fired fairly publicly as the CEO of Wealthfront. Shrep is still the CTO at Facebook, and Marissa has obviously been in a world of pain recently. And I think my point there a little bit is like, I still think Marissa's amazing. Like, Marissa's Marissa, everyone knows who she is. Or if you don't, she's the CEO of Yahoo, who has been having all this trouble recently with Yahoo. And yeah, she's a big failure, I think, in her mind. Like, she's been feeling really bad about what's been going on, and yet to me, like, I still think of her as like a huge successful one of my classmates. And yeah, so I guess kind of, so that's early years. Then I went to business school. It's fun to be back in business. This looks like a business school classroom to me. So business school, I went to HBS, and some of the things for me is I just didn't know what I wanted to do with my life at all. I didn't know whether I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I was pretty sure I didn't want to code. Oh yeah, so I went to McKinsey in between Stanford and business school. Very much didn't, this is my husband wrote this slide, actually stayed in the academy, look for rocket ships. So cheesy. But you know, my main thing was I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And entrepreneurship wasn't like a big thing, like you didn't like study it in undergrad. I graduated in '98 from Stanford, so you know, it was just a different time. But I was kind of like, well, you know, might as well kind of keep my options open. Went to McKinsey, went to HBS. I say it's good for my self-confidence. Generally, going to business school was, I always feel bad kind of trashing business school when I'm out of business school. But like for me, it was great for me. I went straight to Google out of business school, so that was useful. I had, you know, good sort of brand name stuff on my resume. But when I hire now, the way I hire, so we hired 300 people, Shift grew from 0 to 300 really quickly. And so a lot of what you do is just hiring and interviewing people, just nonstop. And so when I look at resumes, the way that I generally look at them, when I do the really quick look, is I look, what year did this person graduate from undergrad? And that puts them in a bucket for me. And assuming that they had kind of interesting high-powered career, they didn't just like go travel for a year. So I count every year of experience. unless they went to business school, in which case I count that 2 years as 1 year, generally. So that's just like what band I place people in. But generally, business school was really fun. I enjoyed business school, like no regrets going there. So in the previous slide, I was talking about like one of the most valuable things for me has been like the network that I have, because I graduated in '98. I've been in the Valley for 20 years, so I kind of know a lot of folks. And the thing and business school is like the greatest network of all, right? But the thing that I remember the most was you sit in this section, right? You sit in the same seat. And I remember where everyone sat. I remember a lot of the cases. I remember some of the stupid comments people made. But the used car case is like a classic case they do where you get paired up with someone. You're supposed to negotiate. You're the dealer and I'm selling my car. And we negotiate a price. And what I remember is the guy who got the best price in all the classroom. And you kind of play it all out. It turns out he just like lied through his teeth. And like everyone remembers him and remembers that he just lied so blatantly. And it's like, I don't know that he can recover in my mind from like sort of just some of that reputation. So I guess my point about the network is it's not really who you know, it's what they all think of you, right? And I think sometimes you think about it as like, oh, it's, you know, the network of people I know, but it's really the network of people and what they all like, would they go out of their way to help you find a job or do the next thing that you need. Okay, so out of business school, I was looking to join a startup. Google was like 500 people, so it was actually the biggest place that I looked at when I was interviewing. And I think one of the questions I get a lot is sort of like, what sort of startup? How would I choose what startup to join? I think I put 2 quotes up here, yeah. So 2 quotes, Josh Reeves, great guy, he says, you know, a place with people you want to become. And then Eric Schmidt always says, like, when you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, like, don't quibble too much about, like, what seat you're getting. And I'm kind of an Eric Schmidt subscriber. I sort of believe that actually, like, so many startups, a lot of my friends have startups that just don't go anywhere. That's kind of the most common thing, is they just kind of fizzle. And a company that's printing money is so fantastic to be at. And like, I actually don't really care if it's not a sexy business, if you don't care about, you know, DocuSign's doing really well right now. I don't really care about DocuSigning, and yet, maybe it's not really a rocket ship, but whatever, like, these places that are rocket ships is just such a fun place to be. And so I did end up staying for 11 and a half years, which was not my intention, but of course, it was just growing so fast, there was just endless opportunities. So for me, I mean, I think it's really important, I'm gonna talk about my own founding experience. And I do think it's really important to have people that you want to become or want to work with is probably the most important thing. And I don't aspire to be, you know, to hang out with, I mean, I like Larry and Sergey, but like, I don't aspire to be them. But just, it was obviously a great company. So again, though, I finished business school and like, so I was at Harvard, so I was on the East Coast, and there was lots of like an interview round, I don't know, when you graduate in like May or June, and all the interviewing happens in like November or something, and everyone got jobs. And I didn't have a job, and you know, I was stressed about that kind of, but I did sort of think I wanted to go back into like a small company in Silicon Valley, which don't come out and recruit at HBS, or didn't at the time. And so, you know, it was one of those, it turns out fine, you know, Google ended up being a good place to go. And I was a product manager for most of that time, majority of that time, and I didn't know what a product manager, so I kind of bounced around, so that's kind of I just sort of didn't know what I was going to do, and then Google was kind of where I actually got like a real job and figured out fun stuff to do. So I was a PM, and you know, simplified version of what the PMs at Google do is sort of a set the vision, set the strategy, understand the customers, understand the addressable market, set like why are we building the product? And then the second part is kind of, okay, if that's where we're going, what do we need to build to achieve it? And then the third part being a lot of, okay, we've decided what features we're building, but like, how are we what's our 1-year roadmap? How are we actually gonna deliver on all those milestones? And I ended up working on a lot of projects that I was not a front-end PM, so I'm not like a product design type person. I don't really think that much about like how the user interface looks, but I worked on a billing system for a long, long time, which was, at the time, it was a couple $1 billion in revenue in 20-cent increments, It turns out it's a fairly complicated product to get all of that right. And then I ended up, some of the reason I ended up staying at Google was I kept telling myself that I was being entrepreneurial, in a sense, because I started the Access team, which the Access team at Google was, initially it was an initiative to bring free Wi-Fi to San Francisco, and then it became bringing free Wi-Fi to Mountain View. But the general idea was to get more people online at faster speeds and lower prices. And so within Google, I got a lot of freedom to start things and build things, and I ended up building Google Fiber program, which this gigabit speeds fiber to the home project, which was really exciting, and it was like a new thing within Google, and Google now has Alphabet, so every like little autonomous unit is what they call it, get to be these things. So I had this notion that I was being entrepreneurial, but it wasn't until I actually left Google and started my own company, which was like 3.5 years ago now, that it was like, oh, it's a world of difference, right? Like it was nothing like being a Google PM, just in terms of like the learning curve and the responsibility, and sort of my engagement level there. So anyways, that's what I was doing at Google. When I left, I was actually working on the Ideas team, which was this sort of like a think tank, and it was like bringing access to information in like repressive societies. It was super interesting. That's me in Tahrir Square, right during like all the Arab Spring. There's a policeman on my left and a military guy on my right. It was like all very like idealistic, whatever. And then I went and started my own company selling used cars. And it was pretty much I went on maternity leave from Google, and I was intending to go back to Google. I had this great job at Google. I was, thinking I was being entrepreneurial, but I had been there 11 years. And I invested as like an early seed investor in Shift when it was just my friend and his PowerPoint. And then I went on maternity leave and realized that he wasn't necessarily going to get it off the ground, and I'd already put in my money, and so I was going to help him out and sort of be like, I called myself the chief product officer for a long time. So that was kind of how I got started in being an entrepreneur. And I, in some ways, wish I had done it sooner, because it wasn't until like sort of 3.5 years ago that I was like, oh my God, I am learning all about how things work and what goes on. But I also think that, I don't know, someone was saying like, how do you learn? We were talking about, I have little kids, and someone was saying, well, how do you learn to be a parent? And they're like, the best way is like you have kids and then you kind of learn to be a parent, because you just have to sort of learn what to do when your 2-year-old cries or something. But really, like the other way is that you have a really good example, right? And so you had really good parents who show you what good parenting looks like. And I do think for me, like having a really good example of what a reasonably well-run company looks like was very useful for me to be able to start Shift and actually sort of set up a company and know, what does it look like to have a town hall that looks good, and how do you share information with your employees, and how do you, set up org charts and all of that, was very sort of useful to have many years of Google experience. So this is kind of what I was just chatting about, but I did feel like there was a little bit at Google where if someone new joined the team and started like doing your work, someone would be like, whoa, you're doing my work. Like that's my, project, that's my vertical, that's my horizontal, that's my, like why are you doing my work? Like, I was supposed to be doing this. And a small company at Shift, like someone joins and starts doing my work, I'm like, oh my God, please do more of my work. I have way too much to do. Like, and I do think there's a little bit of that mentality where it's just like there's so much going on. So Shift, we started 3.5 years ago. We raised $3 million in our seed, 20 million in our A and 50 million in our B. So we've raised 75 million, which is actually a lot of money. And then I think with that comes a lot of responsibility and a lot of chances to screw things up, and we've done a lot of that as well. So choosing our co-founders, worth talking about because there were 5 of us who were co-founders, which is a large number, and only 3 of us are still at the company. So there's clearly like we didn't quite nail that. But I think that, it's a common topic, but people talk about choosing, different advice I've heard, like choosing someone you really want to like hang out with and stuff. for me, like, it's odd. I go through a lot of interviewing. I do a lot of interviewing, and like, I sometimes have this different lens on where I think like, oh, is this person gonna be really good? Like, do they know something? Like, are they just like gonna be a great CFO? We hired a head of finance CFO recently. I'm like, this person is so talented. He's been a CFO at a public company. But really, I think my criteria should be like, would I be friends with this person? Like, there's a lot of that, especially with the co-founders. And I think that some of that comes up in just a, like, I'm working my ass off and I'm like skipping time with my kids and I'm making sacrifices, and I have to really want these other people to be successful. Like, I have to, like, there aren't that many people in my life. I get a little competitive or something where, like, you know, someone else is like, he's the CEO, well, you know, you're like running this meeting. And so really having this interest in seeing those other people be successful over your own success was one of my things that's been really important. But then, I mean, I don't know how to set expectations exactly, but I think that it'd be awkward to sit down ahead of time and be like, tell me, you know, exactly what hour do you like to start doing your work and when do you like to finish work? But I do think that we didn't do enough of it. I mean, I don't know that we didn't do enough of it because I don't know that you can fully do it, but just trying to get all the expectations right ahead of time so that it's not a, look, I work my ass off and I know that about myself and I like to work. And, you know, one of our other co-founders really likes to smoke pot. And like that, I can respect that, but at the same time, like, I also expect him to show up to work on time-ish. And, you know, they're just like I also have little kids, and I actually sort of, my ideal Friday happy hour with the office happy hour is probably like, everyone bring your family, bring your kids, and we'll have like hangout time or something, not like a we're going hardcore to like, I don't know, but like just some of that, like what expectations can you kind of come across ahead of time? A big one for us, actually, a better example was just like how engineering driven is our culture gonna be? And I think we ran into a lot of conflict there, or some conflict there, which is we're fundamentally like a customer service business, but we're also like an engineering company. So how do you kind of, you know, how do you get so that if you're building an engineering driven culture, like the engineers understand like your business model to a level of like, we need to drive down costs. Can the engineers be leading that? You know, if you need to deliver an amazing customer experience, like how do you make it engineering driven without feeling like the people who are your front lines are like sort of second class or something? Google had a bit of this where like everyone who wasn't an engineer, hang on one second. It was like, hang on. Yeah, but like Google had a bit of, if you weren't an engineer or a product manager, you were kind of sitting in a different building for a while. And like, how do you do that without, for Shift, we are like very customer facing, like we bring cars to you to sell them to you and we want you to have a great experience. And so like our frontline people are the brand of our company. So how do you make it an engineering culture without having those people feel like, oh, I'm not, you know, as important? So a lot of that stuff I don't think we necessarily got right away. Anyways, this is the 5 of us. As I was saying, there's only 3 of us left. So 2 of our co-founders have left. And, you know, mostly not like with a lot of animosity, but just we didn't have the same or, you know, we didn't end up realizing that we all wanted to work together in exactly the same way or something. This was our first office. It was a cute little, like, almost like someone's house, you know. Fundraising was another one that, you know, it's just easy to get really stressed about everything. But it ended up being, like, both easier and harder than I thought it would be. So one thing was I didn't quite... let me see if I can get this right. So the way the formula works, so someone finally told me the formula, and I was like, oh great, why didn't anyone tell me the formula for fundraising? And this was, so our seed round we raised from like friends and family, and then we ended up like, we raised $3 million, and so the first $500,000 was really hard, and then the second couple million was like very easy. Because once you sort of have traction, everyone's dollar gets leveraged, but like the reason the first $500K was like just asking mom and dad. But Series A was interesting. I'd never done Sand Hill Road. And we went to Sand Hill Road and we met with Sequoia, and then we met with Kleiner, and then we met with Greylock, and then we met with First Round, and then we met with Oz Capital, and then we met with, DFJ, whatever. So I just hadn't, I didn't know, it's like a soap opera or something. It's just they all know each other and which partner you speak to first, and then if you don't like the partner you speak to first, you can't transfer to a second partner, and da-da-da-da-da. But the things that surprised me on easier and harder, one, we got rejected a ton. So lots of people said no, and if you read sort of TechCrunch, there's lots of stories of, every sort of 23-year-old gets a $100 million valuation, and so kind of I kept being sort of surprised that people weren't funding us initially. And so anyways, the math on the check size, someone finally told me, well, you just take the size of the fund, let me see if I've got this right, you divide by 50, because what they want to do, okay, so you take the size of the fund, divide by 50, and that's how much they want to write a check for. Does that work out? Yes, it does, I think. So they want to write a check for 1/50th of the size of the fund, because they want out of their fund to invest in 25 companies. And what they want to do is invest in 25 companies, but then be able to reinvest money, so that if you do really well, they want to be able to put their pro rata back into the company, and if you do poorly, they want to, not super stellar, they want to be able to bridge you some. So they want to invest in 25 companies. So it was interesting, I didn't really know, we ended up raising 10 million from two different $400 million funds, from Highland and DFJ, but in our second round we raised from Goldman, and Goldman had $1 billion fund, and it's just, if you actually talk to the wrong people, the $1 billion funds don't want to write a $10 million check, it just doesn't work for them. And so then once they've written the check, they want 20% ownership. So not entirely, and some people get 15% and some get 25%, but pretty much they all want 20% ownership. And so once you've taken the fund size divided by 50, if they want 20% ownership, you just multiply by 5 and that's your valuation. And I just didn't quite know that's how valuations, you might have thought in business school present cash flow, you do some model about, your revenue and whatever. It was entirely based on the size of the fund, divided by 50, multiplied by 5, that was our valuation. And that actually ended up being true for both our Series A and our Series B and most of my friends. So that stuff was kind of simple, but I personally found the Sandhill Road type experience is really not where I shine. And it's sort of frustrating because this is gonna be my one being a woman in tech rant or something, but so I studied computer science, and then now I'm in used car sales. So the Venn diagram of women in used cars and women in tech is a kind of small Venn diagram, whatever. But I do feel like Sandhill Road, you go in front of the full partnership, and it's a bunch of smart people, and it's John Doerr quizzing you on your business model, and it's 15 partners in a room, and you're presenting your thing, and they quiz you, and I'm not great at having all of the answers right on the tip of my tongue, and just sort of, it's a kind of aggressive style of just well, did you think about this? Did you think about that? And it's sort of a thing where I want to be oh no, I didn't think about that. Oh, I'm not sure about the number, let me check my spreadsheet. I want to think more about that. And so it wasn't a natural sort of thing for me, but it worked out. We got funding. There's our crew. That's our early crew. But I also kind of want to talk a little bit about interviewing, because that's all I do, and I don't know if that might be relevant. So the first thing was, so I haven't done that much interviewing myself, but I've interviewed thousands of people. At some point Google gives you badges, it's at the Girl Scouts or something. So at some point I got my 1,000th product manager interview badge, and then I stopped counting. But so the first one was, we reject so many people, and this is more particular to Shift, because Shift is just a startup and it's just more flexible than, say, Google. But we reject tons of people who end up not really letting themselves get rejected. And especially because I've been growing some sales team stuff, I realize especially sales team are just really good at being persistent and not taking no for an answer, and actually ending up getting an interview after we've been either getting the interview, or after we've rejected them, actually getting a job. And I think that was one of my big lessons, is when someone tries to reject you, just don't really listen, just continue to be persistent. And so I was talking with one of these people who, he sent me emails over and over. We weren't gonna do, his resume didn't get through our like resume review. And then he sent me emails over and over with like kind of interesting subject lines and then like pretty interesting thoughts about our business and why he would be good at it. And finally we like replied to one of them and said, yeah, you know, okay, fine. He's being super, and he said, well, yeah, in sales we talk about a 10-touch drip campaign, which is, you know, essentially it's just spamming people is what I think of it as. Like, you know, someone, you know, you go to visit the Toyota dealership, they send you like 10 follow-up emails, and people actually do eventually open their emails or convert, you know. And so, anyways, that's my first lesson, is just be really persistent. And he was just like, he sent me interesting thoughts about our business, and finally I was like, gosh, he really wants this job, and he actually has worthwhile things to say. Second is once you kind of get the interview, just realize how much the recruiter is there to be your friend. And the recruiter, at Google and at Shift, the recruiters are often sort of compensated by how many people they end up hiring. So they have this huge motivation to help you get the job. And so I think a lot of people don't take enough advantage of the recruiter. So you know you have an interview tomorrow, and you can just quiz the recruiter on like, what sort of question? Okay, who am I meeting with? Not just who am I meeting with, but like, does George like to ask more like case interviews? And like, is he gonna ask a lot of numbers questions? Does he want to go through my resume? All that stuff. The recruiter is there to like help you look good. And I think people don't take enough advantage of that. Similarly, like know the questions you'll be asked is like, yes, you can ask the recruiter, but also you know that, I don't know if it's useful. I'm just telling you guys what I've, anyways, I don't know if you're interested in interviewing, but like one question every single interview they ask is, do you have any questions for me? And like, it's so stupid not to be prepared to answer that question. Like, that's a gimme. Like, every interviewer is gonna ask that. And so just have good questions there. And if nothing else, ask the person about themselves, because no one doesn't like to talk about themselves. So as long as you just say, hey, tell me about what you like most about this job or why you took the job. Like, there's so many easy things there. And this goes back to my like get a seat on a rocket ship, which is ask about the financials. As in, it's just silly to, even if it's a startup type thing, still understand as much as you can about, you know, is this going to be massively profitable? Because I think that's kind of the most important thing. And then negotiate a ton, and don't worry if you're rejected. We've had people who we rejected, and then they, again, were persistent. So that we have a couple of people who, one who said, look, I really just want to like work 2 weeks on this one thing. I'll do it for free. I'll just come in and start essentially being your chief of staff. And of course, now he is, George is my CEO's chief of staff. And we also had a number of people who've said, like, I'll come in and start as the office manager, but I really want the role in customer support. And it has worked. So this is kind of it's not really a rejection, just take it as like they're sort of saying, well, we're not hiring you right now. And then it's like a little bit about running a company, because we've definitely had so many issues running a good company, and it's like, so much of it is just really basic stuff. And so I have a career coach, and it was like 2 years into my job as the COO, I asked him, like, what does the COO do? And I realized I had no idea what a COO was actually supposed to be doing. But things that he has told me and that are like really obvious are just things like, we have 300 people, and we have a lot of people in the field, and we have a lot of people at headquarters, and it's easy to get like a matrixed organization, and you know, this person, you're kind of a consultant on loan to that team while you do the analytics for the pricing folks or whatever. And like one of the things he said is just, everyone needs to know very clearly who is their boss, and every manager needs to know who reports to them. And it was like, we actually kind of managed to screw that up a couple times, and it shouldn't be that hard, right? And I do think sometimes you make these things more complicated, where, yeah, we've tried to make, you know, the consultant on loan to the pricing analytics team, just like, no, everyone know what their boss is. And I also think that one of the best pieces of advice I got when starting Shift was that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think that we've definitely burned people out. And I think that's a real risk, is when you burn everyone out at the same time and you have, you know, you're facing a down round, and all of a sudden, like, everyone joined thinking, you know, everything was going to be up and to the right, and then you have a down round and everyone's equity is worth less, and they've been busting their butts, and all of a sudden they realize they've been working super hard and you're paying them a startup salary. They could be making 3 times that amount, and just, it needs to be something that's like, you're pacing yourself so that it can't always be that every night you're, you know, not getting exercise or not getting sleep or not doing the things that like make a sustainable life going on. Lots of things on setting culture, but I don't know, I would get to yes, but that's one of them, which for me is I think this is not just in like a company, but just in life. I think it's really easy when people come to you with ideas to kind of think of why they don't work, or what might be wrong, or why you're so busy, or how it gets prioritized. And I think one of the things that Patrick Pichette, actually, who was the CFO at Google, said was he likes to find a way to get to yes. And I really liked that, especially at Shift or anywhere where you've got like people on the front lines are not, you know, we didn't hire them to be leading strategy, we hired them to be the front lines, and yet they are the people who have the most knowledge. So find a way when they come and say like, can we do this, can we do that? Find a way to get a way to say yes was an important thing for us. Okay, getting a little bit more to, okay, so we've had all this good news, you know, we've raised lots of money, you know, whatever, I have a nice resume. So life just can be so freaking hard at times. I don't know, like I don't have all that many insights, but like I don't even talk about it, I kind of forget. Like I stopped out of Stanford my sophomore year, my first semester of my sophomore year, and like, I don't know, I mean I was however old you are when you're a sophomore in college, and like it was so dramatic to me, and now I look back and I'm like, I can't believe, but I just thought my life was over. Like I just thought, I had always wanted to go to Stanford. I got into Stanford, I did 1 year there, and I just couldn't handle it. I had an eating disorder, which I think was part of like the main thing, but then it made me really depressed. And then I, you know, had more eating disorder, and I got more depressed, and I like just couldn't deal with life. Like I wasn't healthy. And so I stopped out of Stanford, and I went back home and lived with my mom, and a semester later, like I felt better, and I like went on antidepressants, and I went back to Stanford a semester later, and it was all fine. And it was like, and then I graduated on time, and like, at the time I thought I was dropping out of college, and I was like never gonna go to college. And now if you go back and then you graduate on time, like they just, like it doesn't even, I don't know, it doesn't even appear anywhere on my resume, right? Like it's not a thing. So then they call it stopping out instead of dropping out. I did a round of layoffs at Shift that was like so freaking painful. But then it was really painful in the anticipation more than it was in the actual like, now it's okay sort of thing. Oh, I just heard a great panel too. Did I tell you about talking? People love talking about themselves. So I just went, and it was Warriors. It was Steph Curry was talking, and someone had said like, I don't know why the moderator was great, but he said like, how do you get good judgment? And Steph kind of like fumbled around, but he was essentially saying the way you get good judgment is by really screwing something up. When you really screw something up, you've learned your lesson. You're not going to screw that same thing up again. So the moderator is like, so essentially what you're saying is the way to get good judgment is by having really bad judgment. And I was like, yeah, that kind of works. Like I sort of like that as a, how do you end up getting good judgment is through bad judgment. And I think the only thing I'd add there is that you can't end up having good judgment by just like, again, like smoking pot and playing video games doesn't then lead to any great insights. Sorry, that's like a recurring theme of my speech here. But yeah, like we did layoffs, and I was like, it was so painful. We changed our labor model essentially, and I had to lay off. I think I personally did like 30 people one morning, and it was like a firing line. I did them all one by one. I didn't want to do it in a group, so I just did it like okay, you're next. Okay, let's go in the room, and like give me your laptop, give me your key. You're fired. Okay, you know, let me know if I can be of help. And then I go to the next person, and like it was like a firing line, and like you tell me like. But this is the best job I've ever had. Like, I love it here. I work so hard. And I'm like, I'm really sorry. It makes me feel bad. But I need to move on to the next person. It was like, you know, like all that stuff. But, you know, I don't think I will make the same mistake again. And in retrospect, this was a while ago that we did this. And all those people got jobs. And I'm still friends with a lot of them. And it all has worked out okay. But, you know, the anticipation sometimes is worse. I mean, you know this. But, like, the anticipating how bad something is going to be was harder than the actual thing itself. Someone said 95% of stress is self-inflicted. I have no idea what that means, but I really like it because it's true. Like most of this stuff is like, it's all within yourself. It's not like it's actually stressful to do most of life. It's just the way you feel about it. And so I don't know. The best advice someone gave was just like okay, you don't have to like doing something, you don't have to look forward to doing something, you just have to show up and tell the truth and hope for the best. And so that's kind of currently what I do when things are, not things I want to do or things that are making me, I don't know, like sometimes just like getting out of bed and doing regular life I don't feel like doing, but like you just have to kind of chop wood, carry water, keep doing it. And so one of my favorite things is the 20-30-40 rule, which I've heard told as the 20-40-60 rule as well. But it's like when you're 20, like you care so much about what other people think and what they're going to think of you and how you're going to be perceived. And then when you're 30, you kind of stop caring about what people think of you. And then by the time you're 40, you realize that actually no one is thinking about you at all. And I kind of like that. It's sort of so I said I had eating disorders in college, and then, finally at some point, you start to realize that no one else is waking up and wondering whether, like, Minnie Ingersoll has gained 10 pounds. Like, no one else thinks about these things. It's just it's all kind of your own, sort of all in your head. So I don't know. I mean, I have a million things of life that, like, have been really hard to get through, and then, they're big blips, and then you kind of just keep showing up, telling the truth, and it eventually, like, generally the trajectory has been good. I think the one place the trajectory hasn't been great, I sort of give you a little bit of my rant on like why no women are in tech and in business, and I'm in sort of business tech auto sales, as I said, and it's like, it's kind of stark. Like Sand Hill Road is, I think the partnerships, it's like 7% women or something. It's really crazy. And when I graduated, there were 27% of my year, the CS grads were female, and now it's almost half that, or it's 17%. Just like, why is that like not happening? But anyways, so that's my story of life can be hard, but then I'll give you those are my cuties, those are my little guys. They're not bigger, but those are my two little babies. So it all gets good. So these are my life lessons that for me, just like have your babies when you want them. So I had babies while I was at June, my little girl, she was so chunky in that way. I had her while I was at Shift, and we just raised our Series A or something. I was working really ridiculous amount of time, and it was just like, it does work out. And, I get asked a lot, like, when you have I don't have a house, I don't have the perfect job, my parents aren't in perfect health, and it's like, when you want to have babies, just have babies. Wear sunscreen, don't do drugs. This was kind of my, like, Stanford, I kind of hung out with two groups at Stanford. It was, like, the CS group and then, like, the fraternity that just played, like, beer pong and smoked weed. And, like, none of those people are actually on the slide of, like, my friends who I still keep in touch with who are now running interesting companies, because they all had, like, non-addictive daily habits. But business should be less aggressive. And, like, I don't know, as I've gone through life, I think I've just become more thankful to people, like, the little acts that people do that are, like, the little acts of kindness. Have ended up meaning a great deal to me. So my last slide is just a thank you to my mom. My mom. So that's it. So that's my finishing right on time. Look at that.
Does anyone have questions? I have one.
Great.
How did you get people to apply for Shift? Like, you went from 0 to 30 really quick.
0 to 300 really quick, too.
Oh, 300.
Yeah. It turns out it's kind of different positions. So to get a bunch of ex-consultants and ex-Googlers to join a hot startup is not hard. Like, we just got tons of applicants. We posted on the HBS, the Stanford Alumni Board, the Bain Consulting Board. They were pretty easy to hire. And ex-investment bankers. There are a lot of people who, like, they've been a consultant, they've been an investment banker, they want to get into an operating role, but they don't have any experience actually being an operator. Those folks were easy. Engineers are just ridiculously hard right now. And I do think, like, that I've done this long enough that, like, I've seen the tides change in terms of what's really hot and what's really popular. And I do think that's one of my other lessons is, like, you can't get this complex about, like, I'm the king of the world, because some of the engineers I know are, like, the kings of the world. Like, they could never join a startup if it didn't have free lunch and laundry service or something. You're like, oh my God, do your own laundry at some point. But, I think designers are going to be the new hot thing right now. I mean, right now, everyone needs designers, because you kind of have to differentiate yourself. So yeah, engineering has been just we have massive amounts of engineering efforts, and I think we pay like 25, 30 grand for referrals. I think it's 25 grand now. So, but that's like way cheaper than a recruiter who costs like 85. So, if you get a recruiter and it's, maybe it's like 80, but still, like, great, we'll pay $25K to anyone who refers an engineer who we end up hiring. So send me your engineer friends, come work at Shift, it's great. I'll split the referral bonus, so engineers is really hot. So it's like, I sometimes like lament this, like, being a woman in tech, and yet at the same time, being a female in tech, like, I'm like, oh, it's so rough, right? But like, I get recruited all over the place. If I could code still, I'd still get recruited, but it's, so hiring some roles has been easier than others. But yeah, I mean, we bring a recruiter, we brought a recruiter in-house pretty quick. Yeah.
When did you graduate Stanford, you said?
98.
So was it really different learning about computers then?
Oh yeah, I mean, the internet didn't really exist. I know that's kind of crazy, but like, I got my first like email account. Yeah, the internet didn't really exist, so we learned a lot of like programming, but it wasn't like client server, like it was like you just write code. I mean, I wrote code in Pascal, so it was like none of the skills really translate. It's more just like the network and the learning styles and stuff. Yeah, but entrepreneurship just wasn't a hot thing. Like going to Wall Street was really hot for a while, and then actually briefly, 2008, whenever like early Obama, it was like everyone wanted to go to DC. And I mean, maybe not everyone wanted to go to DC, but like, so these things change, right? Yeah, Pascal, really useful. Yeah.
So I know there's often a lot of miscommunication in larger companies between like marketing and sales. Have you found the same thing at Shift? And if so, how have you been able to remedy that?
Yeah, I'd say not just marketing and sales, but I think that if you say to anyone at Google or at Shift, like, what are the company's top 3 priorities this quarter or something? It's not always clear that everyone would know top 3 company priorities, and I think just across the board, whether it's marketing and sales or whether it's engineering and operations or anything else, like that's gotta be so crystal clear. And like if I ever asked George, who's my boss, our CEO and my friend, do you think everyone at the company would agree what our top 3 priorities are? He'd be like, everyone knows. I said it at the town hall 2 months ago. And it's like, the truth is actually, you like just my mother always says, I say, Mom, you're repeating yourself, I know this. And she'll say, repetition doesn't ruin the prayer. And I think it's a lovely statement, but the point is, you can't overemphasize like just that amount of communication that's like, our top 3 priorities are these things and everyone should know it. And then, doing things like, we write OKRs, objectives and key results, which I think most companies do nowadays. You could call it your quarterly scorecard, you can call it your quarterly OKRs, but like, I find them super valuable, not really because we don't change our plans entirely and we don't forget what we wrote, but actually it's like the week of planning that we do our OKR planning forces us all to get really aligned on what are we really trying to achieve this quarter. And then we kind of sometimes achieve them and sometimes we don't, and sometimes our plans change, but actually just spending that extra time getting aligned. And I even do that even like a little bit more with life too, is I was just chatting with my friend who was thinking of leaving his current company to spend full time on his startup, and he'd sort of almost set his OKRs for, he wants his like entrepreneurial venture to be paying 1/3 of what he makes at his current job, and he had one partnership he wants to get in place. He kind of had like, that's my goal for the quarter, just like for his life, which, depending on how, anal retentive business school you are, could be useful to do as well. Mm-hmm.
How important do you think it is for people who don't really have like a technical like skill set to understand that aspect of a business, like especially at like a tech place like Shift?
2 thoughts there. My biggest one is, as long as you don't have a complex about thinking I'm not technical. Like, it sometimes kills me when people will be like, I'm not technical, so I can't talk, like one of my BD guys, I'm not technical, so I can't talk to the partnership, like he's trying to do this partnership about an API. I'm like, okay, well, I'll tell you what an API is. It's like high level, you had inputs and outputs or something, right? And like, you'll be like, oh, but it's like you said something technical to me. And it's like, dude, I don't care you studied whatever you studied, economics. Like, he's a smart guy. As long as you don't have that complex, which is like, oh, I'm not technical, therefore I can't speak about basic sort of terms. And just like, yeah, so not being scared of wading in, because just because I have a degree in computer science, it turns out it's in Pascal, which is completely worthless. So actually, people just give me all this benefit of the doubt because I have a degree in computer science when I actually know nothing. So, so it's actually useful to just project that confidence if I can have that conversation. The other thing I will say is I do think it's useful to try to, I mean, like, we love everyone on their, if their resume has, you know, that they can program, we do love it. Like, it is. So the more you can have a little bit of that, that's not just acting like you know what an API is, but actually knowing what it is, it's useful too. Yeah.
So you hired 10 people, and I'm wondering, do you have like a couple weeks after a couple months where you're like, no more newbie mistakes? Like, do you have like a time frame of like a training window? Because I know some companies like, or I've talked to some managers and they're like, after a couple months, if you still make these mistakes, goodbye.
Yeah. I mean, we're pretty forgiving of mistakes across the board, whether you're new or not, actually. Which is a little bit of that, and it kind of depends. Like, there's no great rule, but like, we're forgiving of mistakes of people who are like actually doing things. And I think the thing that I tell people is like, just as long as you're actually thinking, and not just like kind of, oh, I made that mistake because someone told me to do it or something. Like, I want everyone to think for themselves and like lock yourself in a room and think like, how am I actually going to make this product or this company successful, and think for yourself, as opposed to, oh, you know, it said on the OKR that it was supposed to do da da da. So we're pretty forgiving of that sort of mistake. I think the thing that we sometimes don't like in new people actually is almost the opposite, which is, and maybe it's that we're hiring sort of big mouth, you know, whatever, people who think they know stuff. But what I actually don't like is when new people come in and think they already know everything, and like, well, you know what, I'll do my job, which is to run customer service, but first I'm going to tell you that the sales team needs to change the way they're doing their stuff. And you're like, no. You know, there's something about swimming lanes. First you fix customer service because there's plenty broken there, and then after you've got that all working, then you can go work on the sales team or something. So sometimes we actually have new people who like come in guns blazing, and we're like, whoa, down boy, like just give it a month and you'll see there's plenty to do in your role.
Time for one more question.
How did you, so you said that your computer science degree, like in terms of like modern programming, I guess coding, it's kind of like useless now. But so how did you educate yourself in order to be able to speak to programmers when you had to start speaking to programmers too?
Yeah, I kind of think it's just like anything else. Like, I studied computer science and then I went to business school and studied business. And I think in either of those I actually didn't really learn all that much, because like in business school, I didn't really know what I would need to know. And then all of a sudden at Google we were looking to acquire a company, and the question was like, should we pay, we're a small company, should we pay like 20 million or like 30 million or like 40 million? And it was like, I have no idea like how to value a company. And all of a sudden I quickly learned how to value a company that's like 20 or 30 million or something. And I just think like anything, like it's all of a sudden you're in that situation, because you know, you can take a lot of classes on Pascal or on, you know, mobile design or something, but it's like, oh, you're faced with a particular question, you will figure out how to learn that particular thing. So I've just more, I mean, and it's probably because I haven't been in school for 100 years, and so, like 20 years, something, right? And so, you know, you have to continuously learn, and you'll just learn by, especially if you feel a lot of responsibility to get up to speed quick. And like, you know, asking questions of the people and be like, oh, quick, tell me what an API is. Yeah, cool.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.